3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. We're hoping that we're going to be going live here very shortly, guys. Hey, everybody. My name's Aaron. This is Canadian Looney. Things in Canada these days are pretty loony. Here, I think we're up now, so let's just get it going. I'll introduce myself. My name is Aaron M. I'm hosting this podcast video show that we do on YouTube called Canadian Looney. We mostly focus on Canadian federal politics, and we will be getting into that. Well, to kick off the show, I've got an opener here with Mike Barrett. And then we're going to slip into a little nostalgia just as a general opening. Then we're going to jump into the OGO committee. Keep with me here, folks. It's going to be a fun show. These OGO committee meetings are ridiculous. And today they'll be discussing what Mike Barrett is going to review right here. So let's kick that off with Mike Barrett.
I fundamentally disagree with Mr. McKinnon that this is not an expense. His words were that this $9 million is not an expense, that $9 million in a cost of living crisis, in a housing crisis in our country, $9 million on a condo for Justin Trudeau's buddy Tom Clark on Billionaire Row, that $9 million is not an expense. Well, was it a gift? Because if it, where did the how did that purchase come to pass? I mean, just absolute fantasy along the lines of budgets balancing themselves. Of course, $9 million is an expense. And it was taken out of Canadians' pockets. It was taxed off of their paychecks. So, of course, $9 million is an expense. And I'm pleased that the chair did heavily coach the amendment, because in its current form, it's supportable, though it wasn't in its original form. But we want all of the information about this $9 million expense that taxpayers are footing for the luxury condo for Justin Trudeau's buddy Tom Clark, living on, quote, Billionaire Row in New York City. And I hope Mr. Clark enjoys it until the day after the next election.
Aha, took a shot.
There's a voice that keeps on calling me. Down the road is where I'll always be. Every stop I make a new friend. Can't stay for long, just turn around and I'm gone again. Maybe tomorrow I'll wanna settle down. Until tomorrow I'll just keep moving on. Down this road that never seems to end. When new adventure lies just around the bend.
Who was from Ottawa, West Nepean.
Whoa. So I got ahead of myself there. So there's a littlest hobo that brings us all back. I cut it a little bit short because anytime you use music, it's not good on YouTube, just saying. Like, the reason that I don't use clips that have music in them, that would be why, because we're getting shut down. Anyhow. That's fine. We'll just keep rolling. Love it, Mr. Pickles. I do love that song, but and intro, it's a blast. But what we have on tap today, actually, before we get into it, I'm going to tell you guys something crazy that happened today. I got my pets. I have two very, very, very long-haired cats that are more feral than they are domesticated. But I got them the professional grooming job because I have this new house, and their fur over time will ruin it. You just can't keep up. But I want to show you the cut that we got one. There's one right up here. Come on down. she's still a little bit upset. But here, baby. Come here. Show everybody your face. Show everybody your face. Here it is. And she has, it's called the lion's cut. And so she has the big arms and the rest of her body, her little butt is all cleaned up. Just something that happened today. My little one, the little one that's really, really feral, she's still hiding. Anyhow, what we're going to get into this evening is the OGO committee that happened today. And it's about a $9 million condo that was bought in New York with our tax dollars, and it's absolute corruption, guys. No doubt about that. Absolute corruption. This is that committee meeting. I've got the whole video of my cats being groomed, and they cut me up. Like this shirt has to be washed. It's got so much blood on it, for real, of my own. Like they they got it done though. Anyway, straight into the committee meeting. Let's go. Tonight we're going to get to see Brock. Larry Brock, obviously, one of the favorites here. Kelly Block, who's a personal favorite of mine. Mike Barrett, he's a great MP, represents well, I think. And, well, all the Liberal NDP coalition backbenchers, they're hard to watch. Let's get into it.
Mr. John Williams, who was from Edmonton, St. Albert, and Chuck Stroll from BC, Chilliwack area. The three of them saw a need for better oversight of government spending in the estimates process, so started the process back in a joint report to PROC in 1998, recognizing that vast sums of money spent by the government are subjected to only perfunctory parliamentary scrutiny. They got a report through to PROC, and then Mr. Stroll managed to get it tabled in PROC and passed. It led to the creation of what has become the mighty OGO. So I just want to take a moment and thank you, everyone, that we recognize the passing of our three valued colleagues who were so important in the service of Canada. So thank you very much for that, colleagues, and to the families of Ms. Catterall, Mr. Williams, Mr. Stroll. We'd like to pass along condolences from the members of OGO and the staff and clerk and analysts, I'm sure, as well. So thank you very much. We're starting off with 5 minutes from Ms. Tattersall from TBS, and then we will go online to Mr. Quinlan. The floor is yours. Oh, just quickly, an hour and a half in, we will take a short break for the witnesses and the staff to attend to issues. But go ahead, Ms. Tattersall. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. My name is Samantha Tattersall. I am the Assistant Controller General for the Acquired Services and Assets Sector in the Office of Controller General at the Treasury Board Secretariat. First, I'd like to take a moment to outline the role that Treasury Board Secretariat plays in supporting the management of investments, specifically real property. Le Conseil de Trésor établit le cadre.
The Treasury Board sets the administrative policy framework for the management of investments, including real property, through the Directive on the Management of Real Property. Custodian departments of which there are 28 across the federal government, including Global Affairs Canada, are responsible for the management of their real property. Deputy heads of these organizations are accountable for ensuring that real property is managed in a manner that enables operational outcomes while demonstrating sound stewardship. Consistent with Treasury Board policy, custodian organizations must have a senior designated official responsible for the management of real property who is accountable for establishing, implementing, and maintaining a department-wide real property management framework. This framework should include effective governance and oversight mechanisms to effectively enable the management of real property that supports the delivery of their respective departmental mandates.
Transaction, whether that is to lease, to acquire, or dispose of real property, Treasury Board approval is required when the value exceeds a department's transaction limits. All custodian departments have general limits, and 8 have special limits that are reflective of their operational requirements. And this information is available online on canada.ca. In the case of Global Affairs Canada, the department can acquire official residence property outside of Canada for an amount of up to 10 million Canadian. So this means that the property in question was acquired within Global Affairs Canada's authority. The Treasury Board did not review the transaction in question. Regardless of whether the transaction is within or above a department's limits, they need to transact in a manner that is consistent with the directive on the management of real property. So this includes validating the need for an acquisition based on their department's programs. It's supported by the appropriate due diligence, including a full life cycle analysis. It's done in a fair and open manner that's aligned with commercial real estate practices, and that an appraisal from the Chief Appraiser of Canada is obtained in advance of the purchase. With that, Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to answer any questions from the committee members about the Treasury Board directive on the management of real property.
Thank you very much. Mr. Quinlan, go ahead, please.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Real Property Services at Public Services and Procurement Canada, and I'm pleased to discuss our limited role in the transaction process for the Canadian Consul General's residence in New York City. In order to comply with the Treasury Board directive on the management of real property, real estate practitioners from custodian departments are required, as part of their due diligence process, to justify the amount paid for acquisitions and disposals in relation to market value. Plus précisément, conformément aux procédures.
Specifically, according to the procedure set out in Appendix B to the directive, practitioners must obtain at least one appraisal from the Chief Appraiser of Canada before acquiring or disposing of real property, except when there will be an open solicitation of offers and the total value of the real property interest is anticipated to be less than $500,000. In this situation, obtain at least one current estimate of the market value. Emily Bouchard, who is with me today, is currently the Interim Chief Appraiser of Canada following the departure of the previous Chief Appraiser. She has been the Assistant Chief Appraiser since 2017. I am also accompanied by my colleague, Linda Jenklin. The role of the Chief Appraiser of Canada in any transaction is limited to providing an independent and impartial appraisal supported by market evidence to assist in making informed real estate decisions. As such, the CAC monitors the quality of third-party appraisal reports, ensuring adherence with standards and best practices. Still, according to the same Treasury Board directive, they have to segregate transaction and valuation responsibilities related to real property transactions. The separation of valuation and transaction responsibilities means that the individuals or entities that provide an opinion on the market value of a property are different from those that handle the sale or purchase of the property. The separation ensures that the valuation is impartial and reliable, while transactions are conducted with dedicated negotiators. This ensures integrity and transparency in the transactional process while minimizing the risk of conflict of interest.
In question today, where the value was above the $500,000 threshold, it was a mandatory requirement for Global Affairs Canada to commission an appraisal report from the Chief Appraiser of Canada via PSPC Appraisal and Valuation Services. PSPC's role in the purchase of the Consul General's residence, therefore, was limited to providing appraisal services. PSPC provided these appraisal services through a third party, John C. Monaco, National Valuation Consultants, and was not involved in the cost-benefit discussions regarding the replacement of the previous residence. The Chief Appraiser of Canada's role is not to confirm the merit of a transaction, nor is it to reinforce the fact that a custodian department has made a good decision by achieving a given real estate transaction. The role is simply to provide an independent appraisal on the value of a property. The segregation between the appraisal responsibilities and the transaction responsibilities, which rests with, in this case, Global Affairs Canada, is highly important and allows for an impartial step in the overall transaction process. Merci. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll start with 6 minutes with Mr. Barrett, please.
Let's get it going.
So we're asking you these questions today in the context that we live in Canada. That's with housing prices having doubled, rent having doubled, and we have 1 in 4 Canadians saying that they're going to be relying on food banks this fall. And at the same time, we have the Prime Minister's media buddy who gets a well-paid government appointment in New York City, and the existing multi-million-dollar condo is deemed not good enough, and a $9 million luxury condo is purchased for his exclusive use. I'll start with you, Ms. Tattersall. Who signed off on the decision?
So as I said in my opening remarks, the decision was taken under the authority of Global Affairs. So who signed off would have followed the delegation instrument within Global Affairs.
Okay, so from your department, who was the most senior person who touched the file?
So nobody touched the file at Treasury Board Secretariat because the transaction fell within the limits
Of $10 million.
Of $10 million. So
Okay.
the decision was at Global Affairs.
Mr. Quinlan, you're an assistant deputy minister. Who was the most senior person in your department who signed off or touched this file?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Chief Appraiser, in this case, Madame Bouchard, who's accompanying me today, was the most senior person who dealt with this file.
Okay, so we have a 3,600 square foot, 3-bedroom plus studio, 4.5 baths, with a pool, his and her salons, paddle court, golf simulator. Was this purchase, in the context that I mentioned about the cost of living crisis that Canadians are facing, was this flagged for the minister? Madame Bouchard, as the most senior person in your department who touched the file, this excessive, this opulent purchase, was this not something that merited the awareness of the minister?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for that question. The Chief Appraiser of Canada does not have the mandate to evaluate the merits of a given transaction or the decision to acquire or dispose of a property. My mandate is simply to take a given address and ensure that it is appraised.
For deciding the value that Canadians get for the purchase, you decide the value of the asset. who is responsible? And I'm not sure if Treasury Board or if one of you folks would like to respond, but who ultimately is responsible for the value that workers in Western Canada, workers in the prairies, workers in Ontario, Quebec, the Atlantic provinces, what value do they get for this $9 million luxury suite for Justin Trudeau's buddy? Where's the value for Canadian taxpayers here? He was living in a house paid for by the taxpayers.
So if it's helpful to the committee in the examination, I can talk through the principle of best value that sits within the Treasury Board policy.
Okay, so when we're talking about best value, I'm not looking for chapter and verse on what the policy says. What I'm looking for is the practical application of that. So it falls below a threshold of $10 million and therefore doesn't, trigger the need for Treasury Board review, which I think is, that's wild, in this respect, multi-million-dollar estates not triggering the review of Treasury Board. We've seen at this committee before and others where Liberal members have said that, well, these decisions are all left to bureaucrats. There's absolutely no ministers who are responsible for any of the tens of millions of dollars that get spent. So this is a condo on Billionaires Row in Manhattan. We have government facilities available to the appointee to host meetings that aren't next to his bedroom. So what is the value that Canadians get for this $9 million purchase in Manhattan?
So if it's helpful, I can explain that you only hold real property to serve a program purpose. So there's two aspects, I think, to the questions that you may have. One, which is, what are the programmatic mission requirements that would drive the decision to have an official residence in a specific area? Those are driven by global affairs, and I think in the submission to the committee, they reference their policy that drives those requirements. So real property exists for requirements, and then when they go to acquire, what I would expect to see and what I think this committee would want to hear from global affairs about is, did they undertake a cost, like a full life cycle cost analysis of the different options? Did they look at keeping it and making the upgrades? Did they look at what the cost, the full cost, would be of acquiring something new, either through a purchase or through a lease? And what was the results of that analysis, and did it show the value? So that's sort of what the Treasury Board policy sets out, and there's two aspects to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks very much, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Jory, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and once again, welcome to all the officials back to Ogo. I'm going to start with Madam Tattersall.
Watch the mood completely change. Watch this Jawari, what he does, because there's no investigation happening here. Sorry to interrupt again, but that is how this goes.
Actually, the line that you were going
the liberal playbook,
is very
man.
welcome in the line of questioning that I want to ask. You talked about the program needs, which basically is based on what you've said, is determined by GAC. And that is outlined in the document that the GAC has provided. You also talked about the fact that TBS lays out a set of requirements and they review from a completeness point of view rather than a comprehensive and quality point of view. So they look at it and say, was there a cost-benefit analysis? Did the cost-benefit, was there independent appraisal done? And did the value of the new acquisition outweigh the value of the lease or alternative? So in your opening remark, you also talked about the directive on the management of real property. You touched on a couple of the key points under the, I believe it's the section 4.2.23 to 4.2.27, which is validating the need for acquiring the real real estate property based on the program needs and on the real property portfolio strategy. So can you, in very brief, do you believe the procedures that's highlighted by TBS on the directive on the management of real property from subsection section 4.223 to 4.227, all of those were met?
So thank you for the question. I have to start with the premise that this transaction was not reviewed by Treasury Board. So I can't confirm what GAC did on this transaction. I know officials are here tomorrow and they can confirm that. What I can say is I understand that they undertook a financial analysis of the life cycle costs. I think that's something that this committee may want to ask GAC officials tomorrow. And what I can say is what would be maybe helpful for this committee in talking with GAC officials is to understand what due diligence they undertook. We know they undertook an appraisal. I understand they've undertaken a financial analysis. They should set out any other additional due diligence. I believe, and I'm reading the information they submitted to this committee, that in terms of the open aspect of the requirements, that they engaged a broker to look at a list of properties. So there are things that I understand from the submission to the committee that they've undertaken, but I can't confirm. I think that's something that GAC officials will have to confirm to this committee when they appear.
Policies are set, and I've highlighted the policy. You pointed to some of those. Because the threshold is there, and it was below $10 million, there was no need. Am I right to understand that there was no need for the review?
So that's correct. So the transaction limits, and so GAC has had special transaction limits since 1993, which get updated with inflation and market valuation adjustments. But within their authority, they have full authority to transact. But as I said in my opening remarks, it should still be consistent with the Treasury Board policy.
So Treasury Board sets up the policy, but because it fell under the $10 million threshold, there was no need perceived to just even from a completeness. Did you have this? Did you have this? Did you have this? Because it's not needed as per the policy. Does that?
So two things. One, there are hundreds of real property transactions that may occur in any given year, and so that limit is delegated to the department. So they have the responsibility and accountability for that transaction. And so within their governance and oversight, the expectation would be that when they undertook the transaction, that they ensured that their real property management framework, set out all the right decision points and set out the right sort of approaches and steps to ensure consistency with the policy.
Is GAC the only department that has threshold?
No, GAC is one of 8 departments that have special limits. So every department has general real property limits, and 7 other have special limits, and that takes into account sort of their specific operational needs in real property. So they're not the only ones.
Has there been transaction in the past that you may be aware of that fell under the threshold, and they basically said, well, we're gonna conduct a transaction. We don't have to specifically report to TBS, or TBS said it fell under the threshold, therefore we're not going to review it?
So there's lots of transactions that will happen across government that take place within departments that fall within their transaction limits.
On average, what's the size of these transactions? Do you have any idea? And I know it's under the threshold, so you...
It's a good question. Because it falls under the threshold, I don't have a line of sight into that. I think it would be an interesting question for GAC to understand what their transactions are. I do know, I tried to prepare a bit for this committee, I do know a lot of their transactions will actually be in respect of leases, because they do a lot of real property transactions for staff quarters. But in terms of the amount and for what, the higher dollar ones will typically be related to official residences or chanceries.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ladies, sir, thank you for coming in on this chilly, almost autumnal summer day. Ms. Tattersall, a few minutes ago, you noted that the threshold was established in 1993 and it has been adjusted since then. When was the last adjustment that set the value at 10 million?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question. The last time the limit was reviewed was 2022. There was an adjustment setting the value at $10 million for that department. When that was carried out, what was the limit? The previous time the limit was updated was in 2006. No. In 2022, what was it? So that set it to 10 million. Before it was 4 million. That was back in 2006. So there was a number of 40 years, but that's only 16 years. Sorry, 16. Even 1993 is roughly 30 years ago. So what explains that 4 million was raised all the way up till 10 million? Were requests to exceed the authority so frequent that it was determined that the limit was way too low? I'll start in French, but I might move into English later. There was an assessment every 6 years, if I understand correctly.
May 19th, 2026 had not been updated for 16 years. Your math is better than mine. And what GAC did was it did a review of where it holds properties in 23 markets.
Mais je vais reprendre ma question. Est-ce qu'il
I'll follow up on my question. I'll ask it in another way. How many requests were there for spending above the $4 million limit that justified that the limit should be raised till 10 million, 2.5 times its initial value? That's a good question. I would have to come back to you on that one because I don't have those numbers with me. Thank you. Was it common? Well, I'm looking at what was happening in 2007, 2008. There was a $15 million construction in South Korea. A $3.5 million parking lot was built, but of course that was under the $4 million limit at the time. A chancellery was built in Bangladesh, $6 million. Does the value of real estate often go above $5, $6, $7 million? Or is that something exceptional? I'll answer in English.
Quand il y a un projet comme
When there is a project, like a construction project, for example, that could require Treasury Board review because that would be a project. During a project, there might be a number of reasons for a review.
capacity, there's an assessment for that. It could come to Treasury Board. During the last few years, I'm not aware of any major real property transactions that have come to Treasury Board.
OK. Donc, si je comprends bien...
So if I am understanding correctly, in this case, the New York case, you didn't have to grant authority because it was under the $10 million threshold. Does the $10 million threshold include or exclude life cycle costs of the apartment? Or is it just $10 million only for the purchase and that's it? Just for the purchase and that's it? Do you have any
Isn't
sense of the
this
life cycle
ridiculous,
costs?
guys? Listen to this.
Was a maintenance plan taken into account?
Maintenance plan.
You wouldn't want an apartment to fall into disrepair. That's not something established, but it's a good point. It was just a question. Normally, when you buy a house, you figure out that you're going to have to repair the roof or the windows in 5 years, so I imagine there was some similar planning in this case. I would hope so, at any rate. Maybe this question is more for GAC, but I'll ask you, Ms. Bouchard. GAC sent an appraisal report for the residence on 47th in New York. Wonderful building. I've actually seen it in real life, not realizing it was this one. The report says an appraisal report was carried out, and in US dollars, the apartment is worth roughly $6 million. So that gives us roughly $9 million in Canadian dollars. Was there an equivalent appraisal report for the Park Avenue residence, which is now up for sale? As part of its procedures, Global Affairs called upon my office to obtain a market value appraisal. One was carried out, I believe, in 2023. I'd need to look into my notes to get the exact month, but I believe it was in June. We carried out an update report this year in June 2024. So we updated the appraisal report. I cannot go into too much detail about the appraisal report, given that the unit is up for sale. We wouldn't want to compromise the smooth functioning of a transaction, so I don't want to go into the report too much, but I can say that a report was requested and updated. Okay, I'll come back to you later. Thank you.
Grack, over to you, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good to see everyone virtually. Good to be back at the committee, and I want to start by thanking our witnesses for helping us understand how these kinds of purchases and sales work and the role of Treasury Board and PSPC in that process. And my colleagues have canvassed a number of aspects of this, and I understand that the extent or the breadth of questioning is somewhat limited given TSB and PSPC's limited roles. I'm curious, though, how far back the basic process, the basic structure for these kinds of transactions. We've talked a little bit about the policies that are in place and the procedures. How far back do those procedures go? And perhaps this is a question for Ms. Tattersall from TSB.
So the current directive has been in effect since 2021, but there was a policy on real property in advance of that. I don't know how far back it goes, but it goes back a far way, so it would have covered transactions for decades now, but the current policy goes back to 2021.
And following on my colleague Ms. Vignola's question about the increase in the threshold that was made in 2022 when it was increased from 4 million to 10 million. I'm wondering what the rationale. I assume that there was a request from Global Affairs to increase the limit. What was the rationale for increasing the limit? Because obviously it comes at the costs of reduced scrutiny, reduced accountability, reduced transparency, all of those things. What was the rationale that was provided for that quite significant increase in the threshold?
So the thresholds have an expiry date. So the last time that the threshold for an acquisition for an official residence had been updated was in 2006, and that's when the 4 million had been set up. There was 16 years in between that. So the business case looked at inflation over the 16 years, the changes in the market conditions, the real property market conditions. And then it may be important to hear from GAC officials as well, But they basically, is my understanding from that increase, they looked at 23 different markets because GAC has missions in, I think, over 100 countries. So they looked at 23 different markets and looked at the average price for an acquisition of an official residence. And it was on that basis that the update to the limit was made. Again, as I previously said, that those limits are looked at on a regular basis, and the next time the scheduled review of those limits is in 2026.
What would the downside or the risks be of leaving the $4 million limit in place to ensure greater scrutiny of these transactions?
So first, I think it's important to note that Global Affairs, even if they're taking the transaction under their own authorities, still has to ensure that they have the proper due diligence, the proper scrutiny, the proper decision making. So I think that's an important first. The next thing would be to understand what their real property holdings are. And so I don't know if I have details on that, but typically I think it's a question for GAC as to how many official residences or chanceries that they own around the world and how that would bump up against the limit. The bigger ones, the more complex ones that may have a project element would certainly come into the board if it was over their risk and capacity. But I don't have anything else to answer, to add to that answer.
I understand that Global Affairs is responsible for their own due diligence, and I'm not questioning that process. My understanding is that the reason that Treasury Board gets involved in transactions over the $10 million threshold is to provide an added layer of accountability and due diligence on behalf of the Canadian public. And so I guess, given the challenges that we've seen in procurement government-wide, why, just for the sake of caution, we wouldn't have a lower threshold in order to ensure that there are more eyes on each transaction and that Canadians are getting the best value?
GAC has been managing its real property for decades, and it's had special limits since 1993. I found the number. They have 87 official residences across government. So within that limit, it's a balance between those transactions that GAC routinely will undertake and manage, balanced against those that would be above that limit that really necessitate Treasury Board approval.
Okay. I believe you said the next review of the limits is in 2026. So it was 14 years between reviews and then 4 years between reviews. Is the intention to have, maybe I misunderstood the timeline here. Is the intention to have more frequent reviews of the limits?
So I should clarify. The period of review hasn't changed. It's that the limits were not increased. I think in 2019 there was a review. They were not increased in 2019. There were reviews, so there's regularly scheduled reviews. We don't update them necessarily each time it comes up for a review.
Okay. And this might be a question for
Sorry, that is our time.
There's Mr. Chair.
It's past our time, but lots of opportunity. We are booking tomorrow's meeting, by the way, at committee request at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, just for you, Mr. Backrack. Mrs. Block, please go ahead.
Here we go. Kelly Block is a pretty sharp lady.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to continue along the lines of some of my colleagues, but also just to establish an understanding about PSPC's role when it comes to the real property that the Government of Canada holds, as well as the Treasury Board Secretariat's role. So PSPC is the real property manager for the Government of Canada. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. PSPC manages most of the office portfolio for the Government of Canada, roughly a quarter of the real property holdings if you think of square meters of office space or other kinds of special purpose space. And PSPC also manages a large portfolio of engineering assets, infrastructure, things like dams and bridges.
Okay. Does PSPC provide any sort of oversight to the property that we own in other countries?
No, as previously indicated in my opening remarks, PSPC's role following Treasury Board policy, Treasury Board Secretariat policy, is to provide the appraisal services.
Okay, so I'm wondering if both you and Ms. Tattersall would be willing to table your opening remarks to the committee.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We used to receive them ahead of a committee meeting and would be happy to have those in writing. So when GAC purchases property, are those properties registered with PSPC? Where are they registered?
Well, with regards to PSPC, we do not have a registry of properties outside of PSPC's portfolio, with some very limited exceptions. So I can turn to Treasury Board to complete that answer.
So GAC would be the custodian for the real property, and you can either acquire it or they could it could be crown leased when they have it.
Okay, so I know that you spoke about the real property holdings of GAC. I would appreciate it if you would table that list that you referenced to the committee.
I think I asked how many. I think GAC officials, I would feel more comfortable if you got it directly from the department and their holdings.
I will do that tomorrow, for sure. So who writes the guidelines for real property purchases on behalf of the Government of Canada?
So we have a Treasury Board policy that sets the framework, and then within that, there's a requirement that in each custodian department, so GAC being a custodian department, has a senior designated official that is appointed responsible for the management of real property within GAC, and they would have a real property management framework that they're responsible for that would set out how things are done within GAC.
So the Treasury Board Secretariat role, and I'm quoting, in procurement includes developing, implementing, monitoring, and renewing procurement-related policies and instruments. That it also evaluates business proposals, monitors bidding processes, and ensures compliance with policies and standards. What we've heard today is that you only do that once a purchase or an acquisition is over $10 million. Is that correct?
So maybe first, when we talk about real property acquisition, it's the directive on the management of real property that applies, not the procurement policy.
Okay.
And so, as I said in my opening remarks, we set the administrative framework, and then if an acquisition or a disposition is over the limits that a department has, it would come to Treasury Board for authority.
Thank you. So where did the departments get the funding for these types of purchases? Is that budgeted for in the annual budget of the Government of Canada?
That's a great question. I'm going to flip to a page. So most custodians will have a capital budget. That is where they get the funding for investments in real property. So, for example, GAC's Vote 5 capital budget, so for 2024-25 is $192 million. So they have a capital budget that is responsible for those expenditures, which is then voted on through the estimates process.
So they have this pool of money that's provided to them in the budget, and then through the estimates process, do they provide a vote highlighting what they are actually spending this money on?
So it would be considered sort of A-based funding. So they have so many real property assets that they have A-based funding to help manage all of those assets. And that's in their vote 5, and that would be in their estimates.
So because they,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Ms. Atwin, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for joining us today and our witnesses. I'm joining from beautiful Fredericton, New Brunswick. Our average home price here is about $297,000. So I want to help, Canadians understand this. I want to understand this as a member of Parliament as well. So maybe if we can just start at the beginning, and perhaps Mr. Quinlan, if you could, perhaps this is for GAC officials more so, but what is this residence used for? Mr. Barrett suggested that it's for the, sole use, exclusive use of our one representative. But what is this residence actually used for?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree with the premise and the question that this would be a question for GAC officials, and PSPC would not be the appropriate department to answer.
Okay. Ms. Tattersall, would you like to add anything there?
No, I think GAC sets out the mission requirements for that official residence. They'd be best positioned to respond.
And I understand the previous property was estimated value of $13 million. Is that correct?
Could be confirmed through Chief Appraiser, Interim Chief Appraiser, Madame Bouchard, but that is also my understanding. Madame Bouchard?
Oui, merci. En fait,
Thank you. The $14 million you saw was the current asking price for the previous residence.
So can perhaps Madame Bouchard or anyone, could you speak to the key differences between this residence versus the previous one that we've now offloaded to purchase this new one?
donc, oui, je peux vous en parler brièvement.
I can speak to that briefly. The goal of today's discussion was to talk about the transaction for 111 West 57th Street. The information I have on the other report is limited. Also, given that the residence is currently up for sale, I need to limit the information that I can provide on its appraisal. What I can say is that the unit currently up for sale was larger when compared to the one we are studying today. The Park Avenue residence had a better view than the recently acquired property. It's located on the 12th floor of a 17-story building in a residential neighborhood in the Upper East Side neighborhood, which is mostly residential. And considered quite desirable to live in. Meanwhile, the property acquired on West 57th Street is in a building that, a heritage building with an annex built on. The unit in question is on the 11th floor in the annex, the first residential story of the building. Everything below that is non-residential. Annexed onto it is the famous skyscraper that can be seen as part of the New York skyline. I would say, overall, the location of the unit within the building is different, as well as the location of the building within the city of New York, and the size and view of the unit. Those would be the differences between the two units. Thank you very much.
I'm hearing a lot about location, and certainly, more of an ideal place perhaps for some of the work that is done and conducted in that residence. I come to understand there was also some issues with code. Can anyone speak to the previous residents not being up to code or up to perhaps accessibility standards? Is this one of the, parts of the conversation would have gone into this new acquisition was around accessibility or meeting codes, or, can you speak to why we have this new residence?
I would start perhaps by, again, indicating that these decisions were decisions made by Global Affairs Canada, and PSPC provided the appraisal services, but the decision really belongs to Global Affairs Canada.
Great. Well, I very much look forward to asking them these same questions tomorrow as well. So I certainly appreciate your best attempts at explaining some of the thoughts that I think are going through many of our minds right now. And just in general, as my time kind of runs down, have you personally dealt with any similar cases like this where a residence or real property was bought to replace one that was being sold?
What I can speak to in the context of PSPC's responsibilities, notably for the office portfolio, is that we regularly look at our assets that we own and assets that we lease, and make a number of decisions in order to right-size the Government of Canada's office portfolio. And in fact, following the last budget, we are following government direction to significantly reduce that office portfolio over the next 10 years, and that will require us to dispose of a number of properties that we currently have and acquire new leases in certain cases. And the properties that we will dispose of, many of them, again, following government direction, will be put to contribute to be converted into housing. So decisions are made in that regard, and I can speak to the responsibilities for PSPC. But going back to this particular transaction, Global Affairs Canada would be well suited to answer your questions.
Thanks, Ms. Atwin. Ms. Vignola, please, for 2.5.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Bouchard, I understand that the appraisal of the Park Avenue residence is not available because we certainly don't want to lose our negotiating position in the sales process. That being said, would we be able to review it under embargo? Or without the ability to share the document? I would not be able to answer that. I'm unable to say whether there are certain conditions in which the appraisal could be shared. Chair? I would need you to weigh in on this. Would it be possible, in your view, to request the appraisal for the Park Avenue residence so that we could review it under embargo?
Committee agrees to view it confidentially. So done.
Yes.
We'll set a date. By next week, perhaps? Would it be, Ms. Bouchard, have you seen that appraisal? Is it in English and French already?
Yes, I saw the appraisal.
Already?
The report? No, it's solely in English.
Just on this issue?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just going to suspend for a couple seconds for the Liberals for this. But the idea is to have it in confidence.
I just want to make sure that...
We'll suspend for 2 minutes.
Yeah. What are the requirements? I mean...
Merci. Rapidement,
Thank you. Very quickly, Ms. Tattersall. Does the Treasury Board carry out assessments of monthly costs of a department, or do you only look at purchase prices over a certain limit? Is there also a limit for monthly costs? There's an annual and total limit. In total for every apartment, or for each one, for example? And what is the annual limit? I've got the info for Global Affairs. For GAC, I'm going to give it to you in English.
Purchases, limits, it's all available online. So
Okay.
after this, I'm happy to send to the clerk also
S'il vous
the
plaît.
link to all the transactions, and it'll
Merci.
be there for GAC and everybody, if that's more
Oui.
helpful than me
Oui.
saying it all out?
Merci.
Okay.
Oui, vous pouvez me l'envoyer, il n'y a pas de problème.
Yes, you can send that my way, no problem there. Generally, in Canada, there's a policy for purchases by PSPC and other departments of a call for offers. The current purchase on West 57th Street is part of the 5 least expensive units viewed. Why did the government not go with the cheapest unit?
Mark and I know each other well, so we're always butting into each other. Il y a ce concept de l'optimisation des ressources.
There is the concept of best value. But this is an investment as well. There is a balance between costs and program objectives and government priorities.
An apartment that's more expensive but is accessible, supports the greening government objectives, may be best value. So low cost, the lowest cost is not always the best value.
Thank you very much. Mr. Backrack, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a question to you, Mr. Chair, are we doing 2 6-minute rounds here?
This is just, it's the opening is 6 minutes and then 5-5, 2.5, 2.5, 5-5, repeating
Okay,
through.
I'm just confused because Ms. Vignola's round, she just had 2 6-minute slots, I believe. So I'm just looking to you in terms of...
No, her actual in questioning time was about 2.5, 3 minutes. We're letting everything run a tiny bit. Yours ran a bit late as well. But it was probably 6 minutes because of the suspension. It was probably a bit long because of the suspension. I'll restart your time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My first question of this round is for Mr. Quinlan, and I know in the wake of the ArriveCan scandal, PSPC has committed to a number of procurement reforms. I'm curious whether those reforms will affect the real property procurement process, and if so, how?
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, je suis le sous-ministre.
Thank you. So I am the Senior ADM for Real Property Services within Public Services and Procurement Canada. We have a number of collaborations with our procurement colleagues. I would be happy to provide you, after the meeting, with a more detailed response on the application of measures to improve real estate management.
So just to be clear, Mr. Quinlan, that's a yes, those reforms will affect real property procurement. However, a more detailed response would be required.
Donc, encore une fois...
Again, Chair, here we're referring to certain reforms in procurement. Given that I'm the Senior ADM for Real Property Services, and given that there is a collaboration between Real Property Services and Procurement Services, I commit to providing the committee with a list of reforms that could potentially impact real property. But I would like to assure the Chair that real property will not be unduly affected by the reforms under discussion. In the context of real property, there are procurement processes, and the reforms to procurement could potentially affect real property. And via you, Chair, it would be my pleasure to provide a detailed response for use by the committee in writing.
I think that would be of interest to the committee. So if you don't mind, Mr. Quinlan, providing that response, that would be much appreciated.
Great, thanks. And we do have, we've passed a motion that all responses are required within 21 days. So if you could do that. Next up, we have Mr. Brock. Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Chair. Before I get into my substantive questions, I'm just curious, in relation to another Justin Trudeau scandal, the Arrive scam, it was revealed that prior to a first committee attendance, the president of the CBSA, the deputy minister, was summoned to the Prime Minister's office, presumably for coaching. Have either of you, and Mr. Quinlan on screen, has anyone received coaching prior to your appearance today? Was anyone?
Correct.
No? Mr. Quinlan?
No, just answering, Mr. Chair, sorry, just to answer the question directly, the answer is no.
Thank you. No one was required to attend the Prime Minister's office? No? Mr. Quinlan?
The answer is no, Mr. Chair.
Did anyone get direction from the minister, in your case, Minister Duclos?
No direction, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, I know there is a lot that has been written in our nationals with respect to the extravagant nature of this acquisition. There was a quote from Global Affairs, I appreciate, not attributable to anyone here, but I wish to read it out to the record. The residence currently used for the head of mission and consul general in New York, this is the Park Avenue property, was purchased in '61, last refurbished in '82. The apartment does not meet new building codes nor Global Affairs standards. Now, the purchase at West 57th is listed as follows. There is an elegant entry foyer with white Makuba stone floors. Is that a requirement for the Consul General of Canada?
Perhaps in answering that question, I've sort of alluded to it before. You only hold real property to support...
Ma'am, that's not my question.
Right.
Is it a requirement of Mr. Clark's position as Consul General in New York that he has white Makuba stone floors? Is that a requirement?
That's not
I'm just curious.
It's not a Treasury Board requirement.
Okay. A stunning powder room finished in jewel onyx. Another requirement of Consul General?
Of the Treasury Board Secretariat, that would not be a requirement in our policy.
Custom smoke gray oak floors in a parquet pattern. Would that be a requirement, Mr. Clark?
So I think all my answers to your questions will be yeah.
Yeah. The condo includes 3 bedrooms, a study, 4.5 bedrooms, including one, this is the master bathroom, clad in Italian white Venato marble and featuring a freestanding copper soaking tub handcrafted by William Holland and custom bronze fixtures by P.E. Guerin. Now, again, I'll ask the same question that you can't answer, whether or not that's Mr. Clark's requirements or Consul General's requirements. But you talk about this being an investment. Low cost is not always the best value. There are starving Canadians who are relying on food banks who would love to have a real property investment in New York with these type of features. Do you see the disconnect between what the government is doing and the reality on the Canadian streets? You see that distinction?
So I totally appreciate your comments. And
I go further. The amenities include a 25-meter 2-lane swimming pool with private cabanas, a separate sauna and treatment rooms, a fitness center, a residence lounge, and access to a paddle court, a golf simulator. I'd love to have a golf simulator sitting in my basement, but I'm not Justin Trudeau's friends. So friends of Justin Trudeau get to explore these wonderful, wealthy amenities while the rest of us Canadians have to struggle. Do you see the problem that the Government of Canada has with respect to this purchase? The optics are very, very poor. And I know you talk about a threshold of up to $10 million, but you didn't have to buy right at the foot of Central Park. Manhattan is a big island. Why does the Council General require that proximity to Central Park? Why does he have to have all of these luxury amenities while the rest of us suffer in this country? Why?
So I think a good response to get to response to your question, and I think it's alluded to in the package that was submitted to this committee, is the mission requirements are established by Global Affairs under their property management manual. So I think when Global Affairs officials are here, they should be able to walk through
Those discussions.
how they set out those requirements for an official residence.
Canadians deserve an answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Baines, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today. My question are directed, my initial questions here are directed to members of the PSPC. If you could help me understand a little bit more. The Treasury Board's transaction approval limits and conditions for the acquisition or disposition of real property says GAC may dispose of properties outside Canada up to a transaction limit of $25 million. Is PSPC required to appraise properties that are being disposed under the transaction limit?
So PSPC is responsible for providing the appraisal for the acquisition and the disposal. For more questions with regards to the actual policy, I defer to my colleague from Treasury Board Secretariat.
So PSPC is required to appraise properties that are being disposed under the transaction limit, right? Okay.
Yes, PSPC follows Treasury Board Secretary's policy, and when disposal services are required, we provide those to custodians, in this case, Global Affairs Canada.
So in the event that the previous property is being disposed of, you would be required to appraise that, provide appraisal for that?
Following Treasury Board Secretariat policy, that's correct.
And when other departments purchase properties, again, PSPC is involved in the cost-benefit analysis also?
Strictly following Treasury Board Secretariat's policy with regards to the appraisal. And again, strictly limited to the appraisal.
Okay,
and the business decisions, I apologize, Mr. Chair. I interrupted the member, so I will stop my answer. Wait for the next question.
No, you can continue. You were about to finish your statement.
Yes, so the business decisions belong to the custodial departments.
Okay, and then the directive on the management of real property states that departments must undertake a full life cycle analysis, again, before acquiring a real property asset, seeking the best value. And given that the property purchase cost $9 million and the old residence is being sold for over $13 million, would you say that it appears as good value that's being attained?
I believe that the specific question, Mr. Chair, should be addressed to Global Affairs Canada. With the question, the part of the question that pertains to the policy, I will defer to my colleague from Treasury Board Secretariat.
So, in response to the question, the expectation would be that Global Affairs took a life cycle cost analysis of maintaining the existing and updating it, acquiring the new one through either a lease or through a purchase. As part of that life cycle analysis, they would be looking at not just the cost of acquisition, but the ongoing operating costs and the potential disposition costs. So the expectation would be that GAC, in its options analysis, looked at that, and that helped inform the decision that they took.
So, in essence, all levels of government buy and sell properties. This is something that is done, and there's a level of maintenance that's required. We see, properties that may need, to be up to standard, up to code. Like, what are some of those requirements? Maybe, accessibility. Are there were there issues in this case with respect? I understand there was some discussion around the previous residents being not up to code. If you can maybe talk a little bit about that, the standards and the code of what's required in the properties that are being purchased. What do they need? What things should they have? Whether it's accessibility to people with disabilities or things of that nature.
I'll start the answer to that question. So consistent with Treasury Board policy, you would want to make sure that you, one, acquire and hold and maintain real property only to support a programmatic need of a department. So the requirements around the need for an official residence and what those specifications look like would be set by Global Affairs. They have that authority pursuant to the departmental legislation, so that's the first. And then there are requirements around ensuring that the real property supports broader government priorities. That would include greening, that would include accessibility. So those factors should come into play in that business case that Global Affairs would have undertaken to support the transaction.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, that is past our time, Mr. Baines. We'll now go to Mr. GENUIS. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My key initial question here is the why. Because all in a fairly short space of time, in about a 2-year period, the Government of Canada made 3 distinct moves. First, they raised the limit on the value of property that one department could purchase on their own authority. They raised it from $4 million to $10 million. That reduced accountability and oversight. Then they appointed Tom Clark, appointed by the Prime Minister to be the Consul General in New York. And then immediately with this new hyper well-connected person in as Consul General, it became a Government of Canada priority to purchase a new residence. So you have these 3 things happening in close succession. And it seems to me that the timing is highly suspicious. There was no indication prior to Mr. Tom Clark getting this appointment that there was a lot of discussion around a need for a new residence, and yet immediately he takes this position, and all of a sudden Global Affairs is talking about the need for a brand new, it would turn out to be luxury residence for the brand new politically well-connected Consul General. So to the officials, do you know, or at least officially, who it was that started the conversation about the alleged need for a new residence? Who was it that said, "Hey, we should get a new residence in New York"?
So I'll answer for Treasury Board Secretariat. Those decisions occurred under GAC's authority, so we don't have a line of sight as to what precipitated the purchase. The only information I can refer to is what was provided to this committee, which they talked about.
But it was initiated within the department.
Correct.
It wasn't the PSBC or Treasury Board or any other department saying, hey, by the way, looks like we might need this. It was Tom Clark, new Consul General, comes in close to the Prime Minister, and then Global Affairs is on their own authority initiating this conversation about a new residence.
So I would answer that any decisions on this matter would have occurred within Global Affairs.
Okay. For the Chief Appraiser, I want to clarify on the asking price versus the appraised value of the previous property. It was implied by some of my Liberal colleagues that the appraised value was the same as the asking price. Could you just very clearly clarify, is the asking price the same as the appraised value of the property?
Merci pour la question. En fait,
Thank you for that question. The property, as described in the appraisal report, had been on the market for a number of months. The price had been adjusted a few times.
Yes, it's a simple question. I'm talking about the previous property, not the newly acquired property, the previous property.
Okay.
Is the asking price the same as the appraised value, or are they different?
Comme j'ai précisé tout à l'heure.
As I noted earlier, I cannot go into details about the first appraisal report produced on that property because the property.
That's all I'm looking for. Just the clarification. So anyone who's making public comments about what the value of that property is, politicians or otherwise, isn't doing so on any factual basis. The previous property has not sold yet, correct?
À ma connaissance, elle est toujours à vendre.
To my knowledge, it is still up for sale.
Okay, all right. So there is a lot of misinformation being pushed on this, particularly by supporters of the government. Based on our own research, we've seen that properties in the same building have sold substantially under asking price or have even been taken off the market once put on. So I think that's important for the committee to note. Who decided on the asking price? Was that you? Was that within Global Affairs? Who decided the asking price for that previous property?
As noted in Mr. Quinlan's opening remarks, one of the foundations of the process and the...
J'y arrive.
I'm getting there. I can say that the decision was not made by the chief appraiser. Our job is to provide an appraisal for a given...
La décision de fixer le...
The decision to set the asking price, is that what you're asking?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Dans ce cas précis...
In this precise case, I would suggest that you ask that question to Global Affairs Canada.
Okay, so this is the problem, right? Is the government wants to trumpet the asking price as if it means something, but you're the appraiser who appraised it, and that's completely separate. We don't even know who's setting the asking price. Sorry, Chair, I'm done.
Yeah, we are out of time. Although, Ms. Bouchard, a very clear question was asked to you. If you do not know who set the price, please just say, I do not know. But if you do know who set the price, as Mr. GENUIS was asking, I would ask you to present that answer to us.
Je ne sais pas qui a fixé le prix.
I do not know who set the asking price, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Van Bynen, welcome to OGO. You've got 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr.
Van
Chair.
Bynen is as useless as two T's on a...
All of this is to ensure that the taxpayers have received a real value in the transaction. So my first question then is to Mr. Quinlan. Can you explain the role of the chief appraiser plays in the Treasury Board's Secretariat's directive on the management of real property?
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
Yes, thank you, Chair. In the context of the transaction in question, given that the value is above $500,000, the Treasury Board directive states that custodian departments are required to seek an appraisal. It is in that context that our department played our role.
Thank you. And in this situation, how was the third-party appraiser chosen, and what are the prerequisite needs to be met in order for an approved third-party appraiser to act on behalf of the Government of Canada?
Oui, merci beaucoup pour la question, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you for that question, Chair. I will ask my colleague, Ms. Bouchard, to follow up on my answer. But I would say that appraisers must be certified in the jurisdiction in question. My understanding is that we reached out to the renowned firm, I will let my colleague complete my response.
Merci, Monsieur Quinlan.
Thank you, Mr. Quinlan. Yes, indeed. The firm that was brought in to carry out an appraisal report was NVC, National Valuation Consultants. It's an established American appraisal firm with a number of regional offices. My office has worked with this firm in the past. In this exact case, we selected that firm to carry out an appraisal.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the factors are during the appraisal process? Are they standard for each appraisal, or are they dependent on each individual property?
En fait, on va sélectionner.
What we do is we select appraisal firms based on the nature of the mandate entrusted with us. Also based on the nature of the property being valued and the goal of the appraisal. All of this will feed into the choice of which appraiser or which firm to bring in. They are brought in based on the nature of the exact file in question, in this case, the property being evaluated.
Thank you. And then, as the real estate broker for the federal government, Public Services and Procurement Canada is responsible for the development and the management of these appraisal standards. As we're discussing an international property, do you know if any other countries have policies in line with PSPC's valuation guidelines? And are there any other countries that we could look to possibly improve our current policy?
C'est une excellente question. Et,
That's an excellent question. We are certainly always looking for ways to improve how we do things. Our practices closely resemble those seen in other Commonwealth countries. We resemble the United States, the UK, Australia. Our practices are largely in line with what we observe in other countries.
Thank you. And when other departments purchase properties, is PSPC involved in the cost-benefit analysis? It's a question we've heard all too often today.
To answer that question, again, referring to my colleague at Treasury Board Secretariat, but PSPC is not responsible for those decisions. PSPC's responsibility is very targeted, very limited to the services Mme. Shaw provides in the context of applying the Treasury Board Secretariat's policy.
Okay, then coming back to the directive on management of real...
Sorry, Mr. Van Bynen, that is our 5 minutes, I'm afraid. And we are going to, colleagues, we're going to break for 10 minutes right now. We'll come back with Mrs. Vignola and perhaps a solution to her earlier request.
All right, gang, we're going to wrap it up there. That's just some insight into more of the NDP Liberal Coalition, Jagmeet Trudeau scam that's being played on us right now, and Canadians just need to be aware of how tough things are. Like, we're gonna go out on Wayne and Schuster because it's one of my favorite things to go out on, and we're gonna wrap it up right here.
Well, I see by the clock on a wall that it's time to bid you one and all goodbye. Goodbye. So long. So long. Farewell. Farewell. Adieu. Adieu. Be good. Stay well. Bye-bye. Keep warm. Relax. At ease. Take care. Stay loose. Adieu, mon vieux. À la prochaine. Goodbye till when we meet again.